Hello everyone, welcome back to Alter Egos. I'm your host Glenn, and this is just the bit of housekeeping before this week's episode. You're getting 2 episodes this week as we just try to stabilize and catch up a little bit on the amount of content that we've put out over the past month or so, and we really wanted to get back on track with our Rise of Red Skull review. That product has obviously been out for a little while now, but here in Australia, Ant-Man is still delayed, and so the main 2 scenarios that we've been playing is the Rise of Red Skull box and Kang. So it's been great to kind of just return to that and share our thoughts on each scenario, with this week with a keen focus on Taskmaster as our 3rd review for the campaign box. Thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you for your support, and we hope you enjoy this episode. Similar to the retrospective, this was recorded a little while ago, so if anything sounds a little bit outdated, I apologize. But yeah, this week will be Taskmaster, and then next week will be Zola, and then I believe the first week of December will be the Rise of Red Skull. So thank you everyone for the support, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Alter Egos. Welcome back everyone to Alter Egos. This week I'm with Joey, and we're going to be talking about the Taskmaster scenario from the recent Rise of Red Skull campaign box. So Joey, how's it going this afternoon as always?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm going great actually. Just a lot of Lord of the Rings recently. We're on a Marvel podcast, but been playing through the Harad cycle of Lord of the Rings. So like cycle 7, I'm going to say. I've got 2 cycles left, so I'm trying to get through them before the end of the year. And with Marvel being a bit quieter and us being in lockdown, I've found like it's been a good time to get through that content. That being said, I did play a lot of Taskmaster, of course, for this podcast. So yeah, I'm going great overall. What have you been playing recently?
Marvel's Avengers. At the time of the recording, they've only just released a new game mode called Tachyon Rifts, which involve time travel, and there's like a timer on the side that you have to keep from hitting 0 by collecting by running through the little rift things on the map, and it's just I do quite enjoy Marvel's Avengers. I just don't think there's a lot of endgame content for it just yet. So they added something new, so I've just been playing that.
Yeah, and it's a little bit relevant to our discussion today because Taskmaster is in that game. So I guess we can contrast and compare to the different versions if need be.
Mm. Yeah, the Taskmaster in Marvel's Avengers is very awkward if you take the wrong characters. Because he actually copies your character's abilities.
Yeah, it looked kind of interesting, but why don't we just dive into the Marvel Champions version and see what we think of him. So he's the 3rd scenario in the campaign box, and by this time you've fought off Crossbones, you've tried to get through Absorbing Man before the delay counters pick up, and you find yourself in scenario 3, in a storyline where Taskmaster is now the head of police for... he's called Chief of Police, I think, from memory. And essentially, he's just hunting down the remaining heroes for Hydra. And he's a scenario where he's kind of got some really vanilla stats, I feel. Like a 1 scheme, 2 attack, into a 2 scheme, 2 attack, and then finally a 3 scheme, 3 attack. But... really, his scenario is kind of interesting. He has just 1 main scheme called Hunting Down Heroes with 12 threat per player, and it only goes up by 1 per player each round. And his actual set, if you take out the allies, is a bit thinner, I think, than usual. And he then has an interesting sort of quirk in which you're actually forced to take a particular modular set for his experience, and that's the Hydra Patrol. And then you can add one additional modular set, which the recommended one is Weapon Masters. So there's a few key mechanics that this scenario presents. There's a few about flipping forms and punishment for that. There's a lot of punishment for being in hero form. And then there's also this whole rescue some ally mechanic that kind of was something that Caleb said was well received during initial testing, and then kind of since then a lot of people have enjoyed it once released. So Joey, I guess with all of that information, what are your general impressions of the Scenario 3 Taskmaster?
My general impressions are I'm generally pretty happy overall with the non-ally section of it. The ally section feels like a modular set that maybe could have been like required for campaign and not required for not campaign. And the but it doesn't feel as thematic to the like. I get that it's part of the scenario, but it doesn't feel thematic to Taskmaster, and because he has, as you said, the less cards, because a decent chunk of them are taken up. Like 8 of these cards are just related to this ally mechanic. 8, yeah, 8 of these cards, and so it means he's only got like 15 cards, and that includes his side scheme, his main scheme, and his three stages of hero form, villain form. I've had one game, I think, where I only flipped up his own cards and his and the modular set cards, and that was a non-campaign game. And it felt the scenario felt like it was a lot more cohesive in that case. Like it was all working together, and it was actually kind of difficult. And I think that was probably the most fun I've actually had in a Taskmaster game. Was this one time when I just never saw the captured allies at all, and it felt really nice. Like he was copying my attacks back at me. He was doing some shenanigans with indirect with like choices between damage or other bad effects, and it's like damage or threat, I think, most of the time. And like flipping to alter ego was super awkward because you would have to flip back and you'd take damage from that, so you pretty much had to double recover anytime you did, just to offset the extra damage you were going to take when you flipped back into hero. And that was quite good, but that all gets trivialized by how powerful these allies are if you can get them, or by how much extra threat comes on the field if you just leave the captured by Hydra around, if you can't remove them. And I would rather have the option to legitimately remove that thing and add in, an extra Hydra modular set, or maybe something else instead, like, I don't know, a mess of things for some fun the stun shenanigans. Obviously, there's still a modular set. It's like one modular set, I think, in this one. Yeah, one modular set that you can still do that, but I think it would have been nice. I think I would have preferred 2 modular set slots and have this captured by Hydra thing as an option for if I really want to make another scenario easier.
Yeah, I guess that makes a bit of sense. I guess we should probably start maybe just with what his ability is on his villain card. So he has the force response on each of his each of his villain cards, which says after a player changes to hero form, they discard the top card of the encounter deck and take damage equal to the number of boost icons on that card. And so, yeah, what do you think about how this plays out in practice? Do you enjoy what this brings to the game? And how much of a decision is it to choose when to flip, given what pip density there is in the encounter deck?
Yeah, I typically I don't really feel like there's a choice to flip. You need to be in hero form as long as possible. But it really affects your choice to flip to alter ego, I feel, because you really need to be getting full value out of your alter ego turns, because you cannot take too many of them, um, because the threat will get out of hand, and because the damage you take whenever you decide not to take an alter ego turn. So I, it's not easy when you're playing a character like Black Widow, Hawkeye with low hit points, or a character like She-Hulk or Miss Marvel who want to flip every turn. They actually they get punished pretty hard by this, and I think, and that's okay. That's okay, because like some scenarios are going to be easier for certain characters, um, and harder for others, and that's clearly what he counters. But between that and the main scheme doing it after resolving step one of the villain phase, you take a threat or a damage. Um, you end up in this situation where there's a lot of damage coming through, um, by staying in hero form, but you also have to really you have to do some really good value when you flip to alter ego. Um, Generally speaking, I try to recover twice anytime I flip to alter ego, so I can get to full hit points pretty much, if I can. And that's not generally what I would try to do with an alter ego turn. The it's rare that I would take the recover action on the turn I flip back to hero form. That turn, I feel, generally has more value in you taking an attack or getting an exhaust in hero form.
Yeah, I mean, I've generally tried. Actually played two-handed with Miss Marvel and Hawkeye as my two heroes, and I still was flipping back and forth with Miss Marvel pretty consistently, and then Hawkeye, because he had access to stuns and confuses, was a bit more hesitant to rotate unless I really did need to. I think the thing that I found quite interesting is that downtime obviously is an incredible card for what's going on in this scenario, because getting that extra value from the recover action helps a lot.
Also in general, but
yeah, I mean, it's a great card in general, but I guess more than any of the other scenarios in this box, like I found downtime to be quintessential, sort of quintessential here to ensure that I had a fairly consistent way to recover. But I also liked endurance because it gave me like a 3 hit point advantage, so that even if I did take like a flip and take 1 or 2, there was still like an additional buffer than what I generally would have. Similarly, some heroes, I think Honorary Avenger is a nice way to kind of over time buff it up a little bit more, and then like you said, recover twice. So flip to alt ego, recover, the next turn recover, and then flip back to hero form. Yeah, I quite liked the discard pip mechanic. I really did enjoy it more when I played with Spider-Woman in like a 4-player game, I think it was. And like the Spider-Woman player could check due to Jessica Drew's double agent ability. So like someone would look at the top of the deck, and then that player would be able to flip, and for whatever amount. So then the quantity was known, and that makes it a bit more interesting. The protection player that runs energy barriers is always going to have a good time, I think, with this card. It's like a easier way to trigger that if you need to. Are there other things that trigger off damage? I can't quite think off the top of my head. It kind of ruins tough. That was the other thing. Is like if you
I lost the tough to it on Spider Woman, I think, and it was like a 1 pip too. So I was just seeing like, oh, I forgot I had that tough token.
Yeah, I found, you kind of want to expend the tough token before you flip back. That's not always possible, but it's one of those weird factors. Though blocking 2 or 3 damage from the flip is fine. But yeah, I found that mechanic actually to be really engaging. I quite liked it. The main scheme one, I don't mind that it's there. I sometimes forgot that it existed. It was a bit hard to remember, but
I've definitely forgot it existed a couple times, but um, I think it's a pretty good way to um, just as a punishment for the like always hero game plan. Even if it's kind of small, it's obviously it's different if you're in an always hero game plan that can maintain that can actually do a decent amount of thwarting every turn, like a if you're like Iron Man or something. But um, if you're on like a defending Spider-Man game plan, like a Spider-Man protection type thing, where you can in solo you can still maintain hero form basically indefinitely. Um, that helps force you to actually interact with the mechanic. That said, Spider-Man doesn't even need to recover once he flips to alter ego. With Aunt May, he'll just be full hit points coming back.
yeah, I guess the other thing to remember is that in 4-player, because you're discarding cards when you're flipping, you're going to actually burn through the encounter deck a bit faster. And so acceleration tokens are going to come out at a bit of a higher pace than standard games, which I thought was also an addition, an interesting wrinkle to the experience, particularly at higher player counts. I found in solo, due to the low health pool, you often at most go through the deck once, depending on what deck you're playing. But certainly at the higher player counts, you can get a few more acceleration tokens, which makes the 12 per player actually seem a bit more reasonable. In combination with the ability and the acceleration token generation.
You can definitely go through the deck more than once if you play in solo play if you happen to play the right deck. But yeah, I can see what you mean. But it is also it's scaling per player, just like the encounter card stuff is. So it's only really speeding out by the same factor. It's speeding up the other game modes, the other play counts.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I guess like that kind of leads into the sort of discussion around the ally mechanic, which kind of is this tacked on experience to this particular scenario. And I think the concept of what's happening with the captive allies and the schemes is definitely a lot of fun, like you said. It just seems to destabilize the core identity of what this scenario was, in the way that I just feel like there's two different things happening. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. It's just, it definitely, you can tell that that's what's happening while you're playing. Because often you'll have all these like interesting sort of, form altering experiences, or he's discarding your deck to then either thwart or attack you, depending on what gets flipped. And then all of a sudden, like this random, you come across this random ally that's been kidnapped. And it kind of makes sense in terms of the story, but the value that these allies have, not only for this scenario but the campaign, is quite incredible. And it probably is intentional for the accessibility degree, or perspective. But I definitely find it can destabilize what was a very interesting challenge. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on it, but that's been my experience. Well, I don't mind it. It's just it kind of did feel like it shifted the difficulty down a little bit.
For reference, if you happen to rescue Elektra, you can do 12 damage with her, because I think her damage is high enough that you might even consider using the last hit point for damage, which in Expert is his total HP is only, what is that, 33? So it's not quite, so half would be about what's that, 17-ish, 16.5, and she's able to do 12 because you cleared a side scheme. It's not even like a overly difficult side scheme. Like, yes, 5 for acceleration token is not generally something that I would actually bother clearing in other scenarios, in solo at least, but it's 5 regardless of player count, and it has a massive bonus for you clearing it. So yeah, I I do clear these if I can get them. And like Electra's obviously the damage one, but that's still kind of silly. Like you can get lucky, get her first, and then you've just putting her on the table is most of the way to victory. If you get White Tiger first, you're basically guaranteed to get anyone going forward because White Tiger will just handle the threat for you. And then Shang-Chi and Moon Knight. I find Moon Knight really hard to actually trigger his response. It's really good if you can, but the they're more just 2/2 stat lines, but obviously the cost is really good. It's just kind of they just kind of I feel like of the things in there, they're going to do a decent amount. Like they can still do I'd probably do 4 damage and then block with them, or 4 thwart and block with them. But that's still a lot for what you've put in. You've put in 5 thwarts to get 4 thwart and a block. That's a very good trade. Basically, no matter what. Basically, no matter which of these allies you get, it's a good trade.
Yeah, and then if someone has make the call in your team, like you can just generate the value.
Yeah, that gets a little silly.
Because I don't know about you, but I find I very rarely actually have triggered the responses on their cards, which is a bit of a shame, really. But I've just found sometimes I just didn't have the right resource to spend, and so I just found that even just making the call them for X amount of stats plus 3 hit points was invaluable. And worst case, because overkill isn't as prevalent in this scenario, like I found that it's just quite easy to be able to mitigate some of the pressure that Taskmaster exerts by being able to block for very low commitment.
Yeah, I feel like White Tiger and Electra, they're probably getting to the point where you don't want to block. White Tiger more than Electra, but still, just because the extra activation's probably more worthwhile. But with the other two, definitely get definitely there for a blocker.
Yeah, I guess we should probably just talk about I really was surprised and enjoyed the fact that we got these particular 4 characters. I didn't actually expect this. I don't know if you did, but it was quite cool to see them bring these 4 characters to the game. And so it is kind of fun that you can have Moon Knight or Shang-Chi or White Tiger or Electra in your game. It's a bit of a shame that you can only have them in this one experience, but hopefully it's a sign of things to come in the future. I thought maybe you were hyped for Moon Knight, Joey. So
right, yeah. While I like Moon Knight, having him as a card in like one scenario or one campaign is a shame for me. But then again, yeah. Like the other characters I really like I really like Squirrel Girl, and she's only a leadership ally, and I would really like to have her in a way that that feels more like her, like the hero set typically feels like the character. And because they're already in the game, in some respects, that seems to imply that they're not going to be there as a hero for quite a while, which means that there's another character that I would really like to see that I'm probably not going to see for years.
Yeah, who knows what the rhyme or reason is? I'm sure they'll surprise us down the line. But at least they can show that they can. They have a very deep pool of characters they can access. It seems if they can pull these 4. Like I'll admit, I didn't really know who White Tiger was, but I mean it's kind of cool. Just like these new Marvel characters that I didn't know that I can take a look at, and even Shang-Chi. I think they recently just relaunched a comic for him because they're doing a movie. I think with him.
Yeah,
and
I can't remember if it's a movie or a series, but there is something coming. There is something coming up for him. They've pushed him a little bit more since like 2015. It's from I don't know if it's actually their intention, but it's a movie. It feels like they're trying to move more away from Iron Fist and Shang-Chi is like a pseudo replacement for that. Obviously, Iron Fist has fans. Iron Fist isn't going anywhere, really, but the it like most of the things that I could have seen Iron Fist be in, it's now it seems to have been replaced with Shang-Chi instead. Most of the storylines where I'm like, okay, Iron Fist would make a lot of sense here, and then Shang-Chi turns up instead, and it still works. The martial arts, um, spirituality side of things is both of these characters' deal, and I don't dislike Shang-Chi, so that's what it's felt like to me from outside, because I don't actually read either of those characters. Although Shang-Chi turns up a bit in the most recent Agents of Atlas
Yeah.
run.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they recently just launched a new comic of him to kind of set up for the movie as it comes out next year, I believe. But
Yeah, they probably don't want to end up with the same situation they ended up with. I think it was Guardians. I'm pretty sure they hadn't those characters that were in the Guardians movie hadn't been in a comic in like 2 years. The time the movie came out was like
right,
6 months or so before there was a new comic involving any of those characters that just suddenly became super popular.
yeah, yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the cool part, and I like that they've got the hero for hire trait. Nice to see that there again. Yeah, but that's all I can really say about the module. Like you said, the fact that they're 5 threat base means that at 4-player, it's a lot easier as a group to clear them. Whereas in solo, you might have
Depends on the
to
character.
tech for it. But yeah, it's kind of character and aspect dependent. But you should still be able to clear it at least within 2 turns, I would say, regardless of which hero you're playing. Maybe Hulk is the only exception.
Hulk can suborbital it.
Yeah, yeah. So he can jump and the ropes come off, and yeah, that's why I don't mind the experience. I just kind of wish, like you said, that maybe we could move it. I guess you could just do it custom. You don't really need the official rules. Just sometimes it's nice when those things are considered. But yeah, it's kind of like a nice little added flavor that I had hoped could be moved around, but it's okay that it makes this scenario unique. So it is what it is. So returning to Taskmaster's set, he's actually got some very interesting cards, I thought. And I did just want to quickly start with the Taskmaster's training camp, which is his 3-pip, 2 threat per player side scheme with a hazard icon that says force response after a minion enters play, give it a tough status card. Joe, I don't know about you, but I found this card is extremely dangerous if it's revealed in a multiplayer game. If you don't clear it, or if the first player is the one that flips it, it can kind of make it quite challenging to then deal with any minions that come up. Thankfully, his kit, he doesn't have a lot of minions in his kit, so it's a bit more dependent on either the Hydra Patrol minions or the modular set that you choose. But I thought it was a really interesting side scheme, and I didn't know what your thoughts were from a solo perspective on what that side scheme does for your game.
From a solo perspective, you notice that it doesn't have a when defeated tag. It has a hazard icon and it has 2 threat on it, so it's gone that turn every time. Like you do not leave this in play. The hazard icon is bad enough to justify removing it, even if you have to do something like fraught with a 1 fraught character and a like 1 fraught 2 attack ally. To get rid of it, it's still worth it.
Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. I guess part of that was the Hydra Hunters that came in the kit. You know, there's like a new different version of a Hydra minion. You know, they're 2 scheme, 2 attack with 3 health, and they gain piercing and range when they attack. How did you find this minion added to the experience? And like I said, I kind of like the combination it had with that side scheme.
They are Thor's best friend. At 3 hit points, they are easily killable, and they have no when revealed, or they have no enters play ability at all. So that was fun when that came up. But the big thing is ranged rarely does anything. Piercing can be a bit of a pain, but it's after you've already taken the villain attack. So you normally lost your tough status to the villain if the villain doesn't have piercing. If the villain does have piercing and he can get it from his sword, your tough token doesn't mean anything anyway. But in this case, yeah, you normally just lose the tough to the villain, so the piercing doesn't actually really have that much of an impact. But the 2/2 stat line with very HP, that's kind of high for a like a non like mini boss type enemy. Like this isn't a named villain with 5 hit points that's supposed to actually be difficult to deal with. This is Taskmaster's equivalent of like the Hydra Bomber or the Hydra Mercenary, and it's kind of beefy for that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, though, it's probably balanced from the fact it doesn't have a one revealed ability, and it's kind of more reliant on either triggering off a synergy like Taskmaster's training camp, or like I don't know, I guess you could add, gosh, I think it's Hydra Assault, and then Hydra Assault, Hail Hydra. Maybe in some odd world you're pressured to pull this one out, and then there's a risk that it can scheme for 2. I actually found the boost ability kind of interesting because you can't choose. It just deals the 1 damage. So that can ruin your day, I've found. And the other interesting thing about him is that because he doesn't actually have any boost icons, he doesn't synergize very well with Taskmaster's ability. So there's like a way to kind of balance out a lot of the 3s and 2s that are in his set. He has a lot of 2s. He has a few 3s and a few 1s, but those 2 cards are the only ones that have 0 boost icons, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and that boost effect is effectively just a 1 hit most of the time.
Yeah, but it removes like a tough token, a tough icon, or like yeah. It's kind of weird though because if an ally defends, right, it's like the ally is blocking, but because the U is referring to the player, you still take the 1 damage, which I thought was interesting. Yeah. It's like an interesting way to still be able to hit the hero even if someone else is defending.
It could also place a threat on the main scheme if you're in alter ego and using an ally to block for someone else.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a nice addition to the Hydra kit. Because I guess what I look at now for minions, because of what they've shown with Hydra Patrol, I think it is, and the Crossbones one, where they like added the Hydra Bombers back in, I kind of like knowing that potentially they can mix and match these Hydra minions into different either modular sets or scenarios. So if we ever, get a return to the Hydra theme, I'd kind of like to see these guys pop up somewhere else because I think they're an interesting minion.
There are a lot of villains that have ties to Hydra, so we could see it as, I could see it even if we don't fully return to it, just as like a single scenario type thing, provided we're not in space. Turns out Hydra doesn't typically go to space.
Yeah, if Guardians of the Galaxy's Most Wanted, if that has like 3 Hydra sets, that'd be an interesting new experience that Marvel's delivering. Let's talk a little bit about the Taskmaster attachments. So he's got the Taskmaster sword. It gives him +1 attack, gives him piercing, and it has a very challenging condition of you need to spend 2 different resource types and exhaust your hero to discard the card. And then his shield is a similar thing with the same cost to remove, but it requires it gives him a retaliate 1, and he doesn't get +1 anything. He just gets retaliate 1.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I have not removed either of those.
I think the cost is So let's talk about that. So it's a 3-pip card that you kind of don't really want in the deck for his force response, which doesn't have a name. But it also is just a really challenging card to remove. And often the piercing I've found hasn't mattered, and the removal cost is just so expensive. Like you have to have two particular resource types in hand, and you have to exhaust your hero. And due to his low health, it's just more efficient to try and use those resources and hero action to kind of clear him out, I felt. But what are your thoughts?
Okay, so with the sword, definitely, because the piercing rarely matters. It's so hard to get tough tokens at the moment. And +1 attack basically just puts him to the same attack stat as, say, Rhino. And that's not super threatening. Like we've all beaten Rhino before at this point. The Retaliate, it's a little bit different. If you're on a ally heavy deck, I would think if you're maybe playing Black Panther leadership, you'd probably actually consider removing that. But the only reason I say that is because you're playing an ally focused deck. You happen to have Vibranium, which makes it significantly easier to remove. Because it's two different resource icons and Vibranium's two wilds. And the exhaust isn't you are losing probably about two resources worth of value in that you can't use your character to do something else, but that's kind of expensive, but the Retaliate's probably going to get you more in the long run. Like you might get an extra fort off of two different characters or something.
Yeah,
I guess attack off two different characters. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess I just found that Retaliate lately between Hawkeye, I played a lot of Hawkeye lately, and so between just the fact that all my my arrow cards are ranged attacks, and then in other heroes I've been using energy barrier a lot. I've just found that Retaliate hasn't been as meaningful of late, but I also haven't. I guess I've moved away a bit from using allies a whole heap. In the traditional sense. So I can see that if you're playing in the common play pattern of that you're playing allies, using them up to their last hit point and then blocking, that something like Retaliate can really disrupt that. But just from what I've been playing recently, I've often been using my allies to thwart or to deal with minions, and then the hero is the one that's engaging with the Retaliate villain. I don't know what you found with Retaliate, but I can certainly see that with Black Panther or any of the heroes that can generate a wild, like Doctor Strange with his I'm blanking. His upgrade that gives him the wild, the eye
of Agamemnon.
Yeah, or Queen Carrier. I can see that there's some arguments for how particular heroes can answer these attachments, but because of the low hit points in solo in particular, maybe in multiplayer these become more of an issue because there's 4 players hitting into Retaliate 1. That's a big problem, I think. But in solo, it's not as much of an issue.
Yeah, you could also probably remove it relatively easily with Captain America. He already has the physical no matter what. His hero set has a decent amount of mental in it, and the exhaust isn't as expensive for a character that can ready every turn.
Yeah. Now that we're just talking about it, it is interesting how in multiplayer, I think that Retaliate 1 is actually really troublesome. The other interesting thing about the shield is that it's a weapon. So when you do run the Weapon Master modular set, the Treachery Weapon Master actually goes off and surges, which I found quite interesting with the shield.
That's interesting because Taskmaster's shield is a weapon, but Captain America's isn't. I'm pretty sure they're made of the same thing.
Well, maybe Captain America just hasn't become a weapon master just yet, so misses out.
I'm pretty sure Taskmaster in the comics learned how to use a shield by watching Captain America.
Yeah, that might be true. Should we talk about Photographic Reflexes, which is his other attachment?
That's a very interesting card, just in general.
Don't talk about the wording. So it's a force interrupt. When a player attacks Taskmaster, prevent all damage that would be dealt to Taskmaster and deal an equal amount of damage to that player's identity instead. Then discard Photographic Reflexes, max once per attack. Yeah, do you want to talk about what this card does and how it functions and all the questions that arise from the
Yep.
attachment?
So something that's important here is it's not actually canceling the attack. So if the attack has other effects, so for instance, if you play toe to toe, he still hits you, and then you take the 5 damage back um, from the photographic reflexes. You won't take 10 if both of them are out because it's max 1 per attack, so only one of them will trigger. But it doesn't. Yeah, the important thing here is it doesn't cancel the attack. It also doesn't trigger off of non-attacks. So if you happen to have, say, 17 energy icons and you're playing a lightning strike, which is not an attack, you can actually like kill him without ever actually triggering these. More realistically, you would do it when he's on lower hit points, or you could use something like uh, Nick Fury. Nick Fury's 4 damage when he comes into play is not an attack. Another important thing here is that if you attack with a minion, or not a minion, an ally, the damage goes to your player identity, which I think is actually probably the way you'll do this most of the time. You'll attack with something that's got like 1 attack on it, take your consequential damage and whatnot, because you are actually doing an attack still, unlike stunned, which doesn't actually do an attack. And then he'll just deal 1 damage to you, which is the lowest this could potentially do. Obviously, that depends if it's an option for you to do that, because it's not always. You may not have a Squirrel Girl or a Shuri to punch Taskmaster for the minimum effect here.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, if I, let's say hypothetically I do an attack that then results me dealing 0 damage, the effect triggers, but nothing actually happens, and then it doesn't discard itself. That's an interesting sort of caveat.
Which one?
Because it says what the trigger happens when a player attacks. So
Yep.
So it happens before damage is determined, right? It's just you declare the attack, and then the interrupt triggers. So if there are card effects that lower the amount that you deal, I can't think of any card that exists that does that.
Well, you could tackle without using the physical resource.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, so if you did that, then this card still sticks around, but because the then clause kind of prohibits it from clearing, which is interesting. Yeah, I found this card really interesting. It was a bit hard to get my head around, but I thought it was a neat addition to what's going on in this scenario.
I have actually triggered off of a tackle before, although I put the physical icon in because I was like, yeah, that's like the lowest damage I can do with this character anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think it gave me lethal that turn too, so it didn't matter. But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
I think it's a really interesting effect, and it honestly kind of makes the scenario quite memorable. Just because it's an effect that we haven't seen before. So yeah, I quite liked it. On that topic of unique experiences, there is the treachery called Mimicry, which we saw the art for like way back before the box came out, but we didn't know what it did. And what it does is that it discards the top 5 cards of your deck, and if a thwart card was discarded this way, Taskmaster schemes. That's while you're in Alter Ego. And if you're in hero form, it says discard the top 5 cards of your deck. If an attack card was discarded this way, Taskmaster attacks you. Joy, how do you feel about this treachery and what it can do during your game?
It's weird because in other scenarios we've seen similar effects, but they're typically like you get the attack or thwarts no matter what. This actually almost feels like a reprieve rather than I suppose the Ultron one just discards cards as well. So it's around this level when it triggers. But it feels like it's a bit of a reprieve versus those other ones normally feel awful. I'm thinking specifically like, is it Death from Above in Mutagen Formula?
Yeah, that's a deadly card.
And there's an equivalent card in Ultron that discards cards based off the amount of threat or attack dealt.
Ultron Rage, yeah.
Yeah, there are some really interesting things that I've had some. I've never actually not had this trigger, the attack or scheme. every single time. And one time it was super awkward because there was only 3 fort cards in my deck, and 2 of them were already in my discard pile. And he was discarding like 5 cards from a 20-card deck. And he still managed to find the third one. And I guess it's just like I guess it's just because I have a tendency to put a decent number of events in any deck I build. I haven't done a extreme support or upgrade build in quite a while, and because of that, there's just always triggers. Even if I think that if it doesn't trigger, this card goes from being like okay threat, like reasonably threatening, to just being, if it doesn't trigger, it's basically a reprieve. Like, that card did nothing. Have fun.
Yeah, I was thinking that I think Hulk is pretty good into this because he only has 2 attack cards in his set. So you could theoretically build a Hulk deck that only has 2 attack cards.
Yeah, and he has only 2 fort cards too.
Yeah, I'll admit that in Hawkeye, I have tried to put the cable arrows underneath the quiver, and then I haven't had any other thwart cards in my kit to try and dodge this, like theoretically. But it kind of, for me, I find that it hits quite consistently. I'm rather surprised, to be honest. Often it's the 5th card, and that's what gets me to close to flip the table, because it's like you're fine until the 5th flip, and then you're like, guess he's going to activate. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting card, and again, it makes this a unique experience because you could easily just tack on a Taskmaster activates against you sort of card, but this does it in a really thematic way, and so I really liked what they did with this effect. So to wrap things off, we've got the final card, the Hunted by Hydra, which introduces the Insight keyword to this scenario. It has Insight 1, and it says, when revealed, each hero in hero form takes 1 damage and discards 1 card at random from their hand. And Bucky Barnes says it's a bad time to be a hero. Joey, what do you think about this card, and how have you felt it's been in your experience with this scenario?
When you're solo and and you happen to have flipped to Alter Ego that turn, it's amazing because it flips and just puts 1 threat down, and that is, I think, probably the weakest I've ever had a. Oh no, wait! I had a stun. I had one in Absorbing Man. I had a "you are stunned" card flip up when I was already stunned. It can do nothing if you. In fact, if you're playing a character that flips back and forth, or if your playstyle has a tendency to flip back and forth, which is not unreasonable. I probably flip back to Alter Ego more than most players do, particularly for a solo player. And this can do nothing, although next to nothing. 1 threat is not a lot. But when it does trigger in solo, because you're kind of figuring you're going to be taking attacks and whatnot, you probably aren't sitting at 1 hit point unless things went badly during the activations. So you probably won't lose to it, but in hero form, it's hurting your resources and attacking you in both directions that the villain typically has to win. So that can be threatening. In multiplayer, it's probably a lot worse because you're getting your team's losing probably 2 to 4 resources out of the next turn. That's assuming you don't lose the cards you actually need. That's also assuming you only get 1 of these.
Yeah, 2 of them in a row is quite painful. I guess I found that I just like that this kind of, again, adds to that tension that this scenario tries to build between kind of pressuring you to be in hero form to execute your game plan and kind of mitigate the threat and the threats that have been thrown at you from the encounter deck. But then in response to that, there's a lot of potential punishment for doing so. And then, like you said, like flipping back has its own drawbacks between, the fact that you're going to have to cop another amount of damage when you end up flipping back to hero form, and also just your inability to thwart as efficiently while in alter ego. So yeah, I quite like what this does to the package. The resource hit is, I think, more impactful than the damage, but I can see how the damage can sort of build up from the sort of 1,000 paper cut approach, where like different things are pinging you for one in each different way.
Yeah, the actual resource hits, assuming it doesn't hit a double resource card, which that just feels bad. It's kind of like having it be Insight 2, I guess. Honestly, that's probably the best parallel, but it's not actually resource Insight 2. And that's looking pretty scary, but it's still a little bit less than what I would expect from, say, an activation. An activation, I think, would actually do more than this, but like not every card needs to be super scary. And I think the insight is a good use here to make it, at least a little bit more. So that this card is not, it's probably not going to be the card that loses you the game. Is where I'm going with this. It's it's like a moderate card to fill up the encounter set, because if every single card was super scary, like if you were always taking an extra activation or equivalent, you could push the difficulty up to a fairly, possibly even impossible degree. I think once you start taking too many of those, like in expert, it would be rough if you were getting like 2-3 activations every turn from a 3 or 4 attack character. You could potentially lose no matter what. In heroic, when where you'd be taking an extra one, you'd probably just be losing, probably turn 1 most games.
Yeah. Heroic. It is interesting how heroic kind of does bend or warp some of these experiences slightly. Yeah, that's a good point. I can see this card being a bit more dangerous in that sort of context. So I guess the final thing to talk about is just a brief discussion of what Hydra Patrol and the experimental weapons deck adds to the scenario during campaign play. So, Joey, what are your thoughts about starting with the Hydra Patrol side scheme in play? And in addition to that, do you think any of the experimental weapons kind of add a degree of challenge that might be, different to what the standard scenario provides?
No, I actually think experimental weapons are easier than most. This is the point where experimental weapons might actually be easier than the set itself, and because of that, when they flip up, it's actually like that's a turn where I got off easy. Although it can be a bit of a pain if you're playing an unflappable defense focus deck, because any level of attack is a pain with that style of deck. But the Hydra Patrol, I think, is just a really well used deck, really well used modular set here. Like I think the reason it's mandatory is I think they will probably hit part of his set at some point. But it is really difficult to both thwart for 2 and deal with the minion on the turn 1, particularly seeing as you get to choose, don't you? Yeah, you get to choose. But they're not revealed; they're put into play. So because you have to defeat this and then deal with the minion, it's just like a really good threat for turn 1, because you probably can't do both on turn 1 normally. Turn 2 or 3, sure, like if it comes up on the second deck cycle and you're on like turn 8, you can probably easily deal with 2 threat per player and then take a minion, although it's a minion each. The plus side is in solo play, you can just take out one of the Hydra regulars and their insight won't go off, and they're the only um, minions in the set by default. So obviously you can include more with modular sets that have a when revealed effect, and you can just like take that off the table, which is actually not bad. And you can key you can key Thor off of the off of this as well, which is fun. Just remove the side scheme, draw 2 cards, kill a Hydra regular, and that was fun.
Yeah, I think you pointed out like the key difference is that maybe in solo play, getting the Hydra regular and removing the side scheme is kind of a straightforward affair. In 4-player, it's a bit more messy, but it is kind of like a really fun way to start the scenario. On Expert, it kind of means that at some point there are now 4 minions in play, and on turn 1 you also get dealt the additional encounter card from the Taskmaster to set up when revealed effect. So I think it's like a really great way to kind of provide a different way of initial pressure that, you know, differentiates itself from Claw and Mutagen Formula, in that it's kind of got a mix of both. It has a crisis side scheme that starts in play, and it has a way of dealing additional threats in the early part of the game in an interesting way. I think it kind of... You go.
It's definitely more threatening if you've got 3 or more players, because then there's not enough Hydra regulars to just give 1 to each player. You have to actually take one of the more threatening options.
Yeah, the guard. Yeah, see, like the guards then deal additional encounter cards, and so like the pressure just continues. Yeah, I think it's just a really well designed approach to a scenario that wants to pressure you early on. I think it's really well balanced. So that wraps up our thoughts on Taskmaster. Bit of a longer one, Joey. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share on this scenario before we close up?
I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I just want to say I think of the 3 so far that we've talked about, I still enjoyed Crossbones a bit more. I think Taskmaster is something that I really enjoy playing multiplayer. It's a bit harder to incentivize me to come back to play it solo, but occasionally I do return to it. But in 3 or 4 player, it's definitely been a blast to play when possible.
I've enjoyed it as a like moderate difficulty scenario, even when playing solo. Like a little bit harder than your say Crossbones or Rhino, but it's more in line with say Claw, which we don't have a lot of scenarios that fit in that bracket. I feel we start getting to the Ultron Mutagen difficulty level a lot more frequently. Then we get to the medium spot.
I think that's a really good point, because sometimes I just want that game that is that balance like you're talking about. And yeah, I could definitely see throwing Taskmaster into the conversation between Claw. Yeah, is there any others that you'd put in that medium like category?
Hang nowadays. Because at the moment I would probably put that in there as well. Though I haven't played too much of it just yet.
Yeah, I think Kang for me, it's probably like we're talking like stakes. It's like medium. What do you call it? Medium well done. So like, you know, if Taskmaster is a medium, I'd put that in the medium well done sort of category. The good thing about Kang is that the modular sets, I think, can really help shape like an experience like Taskmaster a bit more. And like most scenarios, if you just add in different modular sets, you're going to get a very different experience. And for Taskmaster, that's particularly so, because if you increase the pip density, the force response becomes a bit more interesting on his villain ability.
Throw in a copy of Legions of Hydra. Clearly, what you just wanted Hydra guards every turn, right? Hydra soldiers, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good starting point for like theme decks. I've been doing some like pseudo story stuff where like Kang, like I did like a Rise of Red Skull campaign where like Kang was actually like the villain behind it all, and so like you just pick a different Kang modular set between each of them, and then after you beat Red Skull, you go and play the Kang scenario, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, definitely added a lot to this Rise of Red Skull campaign, that's for sure. But we'll get to Kang probably in a month or so for our full thoughts. But this was our impressions of Taskmaster. So thanks again for joining the show, Joey.